Spurgeon said, "There's no man, there's no woman, there's no child who, if their right is heart with God, cannot do some good by God's providence in the work of winning souls." What comes to mind when you hear the word evangelism ministry will affect largely how you go about doing evangelism ministry. We see in the New Testament that there's obviously a necessary space and requirement for local churches to be doing organized, intentional, ministerial, church-led outreach ministry. That can be where you bring people into the church. That can be where you go out to the world and proclaim and preach and hand out gospel tracts, sermons, etc. But if Christians go around thinking, and you can fall into this rut easily, that evangelism ministry is something that the evangelists at church do, or something that the pastors do, or something that I could do at church or through church, then you will miss what is largely the key and the power to an evangelistic life. Spurgeon called evangelism soul winning. It wasn't unique to him. He was just picking up Proverbs 11 verse 30 in the Old Testament that speaks of the wise man being somebody who wins souls. When you think of it that way, I think it puts a different spin on the whole idea of evangelism. If you think of evangelism as merely an organized time of ministry only, right, merely that, then you'll fail to do what Spurgeon was gifted at, what Paul was a master at, and what Jesus was the Lord of, which is utilizing ordinary time to influence souls towards salvation. Evangelism is not merely evangelism if you get somebody to sign a card or give their life to Jesus. Evangelism is speaking the word of God, speaking especially the gospel of Jesus, about Him dying for sinners, sinners being able to have salvation and forgiveness in and through His death if they believe on Him by faith. Evangelism is proclaiming that, is speaking that to people, anticipating that they will have a positive response, hoping that they have a positive inclination after hearing it and giving their life to Jesus. You want to be invitational in it, but it's not only evangelism if somebody gets saved. That means that we should expect that there are oftentimes, it happened to Jesus and Paul and others in the New Testament, there will be times, often, when evangelism consists of speaking a word from the Bible, encouraging somebody to consider Jesus, declaring the reality, the veracity, the historicity, the truthfulness of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, telling them about the good news of forgiveness. It could be a 1-minute conversation as you're paying for your fuel. It could be a 10-minute conversation over lunch at work. It could be an in-depth conversation with somebody who you know well. It could be a fairly surface-level conversation as you're speaking to somebody that you've met recently. It could be a relationship evangelism with somebody who has known you for 40 years and wants to know more about what you've mentioned before. It could be an introductory conversation with somebody you've just met after the sermon at church. But soul winning reminds us that, calling it soul winning reminds us that it's really just influencing souls for Jesus. It has this idea rather than getting people across a line like in a race. It's not that kind of soul winning. It's a kind of winning that happens when a man is pursuing a woman. He's winning her heart. It's a kind of winning that happens in a battle when an army moves slowly but surely to overcome the city and claim it for their king. Soul winning requires a sense of gravity, where you're pulling winning people over to your truth and what you're speaking from the Word of God. Soul winning can happen really anywhere. If you overthink evangelism, what you need to be able to say, the apologetics that are required, the fluency of speech, the articulation you require, you'll overthink it, you'll underperform. If you just think of soul winning as speaking the word about Jesus when I have opportunities, then you'll realize you can do that 10 times a day. Colleagues, your neighbor, your children, the cashier at the shops, somebody you've bumped into or sitting next to at uni or on the bus. You can just be sowing the seed, and as Paul said, one sows, another waters, God gives increase. Maybe you're evangelizing to somebody who won't be saved for 20 years, but you're playing a part in their soul being won. Maybe you're not talking to somebody who you'll ever meet again, but you're playing a part in the long chain of events that Jesus is going to use to pull the fish into the boat. So I encourage you, make little steps. Keep a bunch of tracts, gospel tracts in your car, and every time you fill up for fuel, hand one to the cashier and invite them to church and tell them it's a message about Jesus. They'll probably take it. Every day that you go on a walk or take your bins out, try and remember to put a tract in somebody's letterbox in your street. At lunch, over work, try and utilize, especially the Monday mornings, how was your weekend? Leverage that to, it was really great. I heard a sermon about Jesus being the one who is seeking and saving the lost. And there's your in. Be wise about it. Paul said we need wisdom for this. He even asked for prayer so that he could be wise about God opening a window of opportunity that he can speak the word of Christ in. So pray for opportunity, pray for wisdom. It'll always be awkward. Just push through that first conversation starter and be about the business of conversing, talking, handing out, and praying for the slow but sure work of soul winning.